Welcome back to Adulthood, friends. This is the discussion-based podcast where two former childhood acquaintances, now friends, discuss the things that inevitably matter.
Inevitably matter. Ooh, inevitably, that's your adverb of the week.
Yeah. And this is actually part two of a two-part thing on
Thing.
it's part
A two-parter.
two-part episode. It's a two-parter. It's two episodes, but also one large episode.
We're gonna resolve the cliffhangers of the last episode.
Yeah, we left you guys hanging a little bit, so we're gonna pull you off that cliff and back onto solid ground now. So we're gonna continue talking about trauma. This is trauma part 2.
Trauma, not drama, but trauma.
Not drama, although drama may come up as it did in the last episode. We left off with the cliffhanger of what type of defensive strategies Josh has. So from the 4 Fs, which I'm reluctant to call that because he sort of takes it the wrong way, but the 4
so
Fs,
wrong.
What were they again? Do you remember now, Josh?
Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
Very good.
You know, I think I might need a little bit more time to think about this. Maybe the music should play.
You know what? That's a good idea.
And over the course of the music, I might have an answer for you.
Okay.
Which
perfect.
kind I am.
All right. Well, let's cue the music.
Did it start yet?
And we're back. Josh.
Yeah.
Have you had time to think?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So this is how one reacts to stressful situation.
Oh, right. Yeah, I guess we should recap what that was in case you've forgotten over the course of a week. So yeah, the responses that you kind of automatically go into when there's a perceived threat. So it's usually if someone has experienced some kind of trauma, or they more easily flip into these states or defensive structures, as I called them last time. Sometimes there'll be kind of a flashback. And what do you think? Like, what do you think your reaction is, your automatic reaction is to feeling a perceived threat?
A perceived threat. So is the person, let's say it's a person. Is it if the threat is a person?
Yeah.
Is it, they're the threat? So like, would I fight that threat?
Yeah, it can be a person, but it's more like you're in a situation that reminds you of something. So let's say, for example, this is a weird example, but you know how you have that word perfectionism? Let's talk about your word perfectionism.
My word
Josh.
Perfectionism. That like I want to find the right word for something.
Exact right word. So
well, not that I ever do. I always find the wrong words.
Well, I mean, I thought I was picky about words that I chose.
You mean like when we're writing descriptions and stuff? And
I mean in life, and yeah, when you're writing descriptions, when you're talking, you seem to sometimes your brain won't let you continue the sentence until you found the right word. Like you'll kind of trip over a little bit because you're like, oh, I need to find the right word. And you told me once that that's because, I think you told us all once that that's because you were kind of, was there something that happened to you early on that kind of?
It could be one of the reasons or main reason that I do this. But yeah, with my mother, for example, she would punish me so easily if I said the wrong thing. Right. She would either not just punish me, she'd yell at me or scream. She screamed. I don't know if I mentioned this. My mother screamed a lot. You know, our household was filled with a lot of yelling. And so we didn't like it when she yelled. So I'd always try to do, I'd have to, and if I said something in the wrong way, it could lead to that. So I always tried to find the exact right way to say something.
So if someone, let's say right now, if you were in a situation and someone started screaming at you all of a sudden, and you would have maybe, let's say, an emotional sort of flashback to being a kid being screamed at by your mom. That's what we're talking about with the kind of triggering, right? Because it reminds you, and in a way, your brain doesn't see a difference between being an unsafe kid in that environment and being the adult that you now are.
Right. So how do I deal with that threat?
Yeah. Do you know what your response is?
Let's see if I can figure this out.
Okay, let's see.
I really do feel like you're a guest these 2 episodes.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Just read me the whole book.
Lead you the entire book. So you should read this book, by the way. I highly recommend this.
What's the book again? Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving. Oh, so it gives you ways to deal with it. Good.
Right. It's not just to survive, but also to thrive. And it's by Pete Walker. This was a therapist recommendation.
Okay.
And being the good student that I am, I went out and bought all the books that he recommended. Sorry, my cat's just staring me down. You want the window open? I'm not sure what you want from me.
Which one is your cat?
She is Fawn. Are you Fawn, kitty?
Really?
Fawn?
That's not so typical of cats. That's cool.
No, she's not typical of cats. She's Fawn and Flight. Well,
so you could be more than one.
Oh yeah, so there are combinations too, yeah. But I would say she's mainly Fawn.
Because I feel like it depends on the situation, right?
It does, yes. But you'll have you'll have an automatic one.
One that I tend to do more.
Like anything where you're categorizing things, it's not that clear. So like there are some where he's like put Fawn Flight, Super Nurse, so that some of them he'll like name, or Fawn Fight, Smother Mother. I think I'm more Fawn Fight.
I think for sure I'm not a freeze.
Yeah, I don't think you're a freeze.
I really think I don't think that's how I deal with things.
Yeah.
I also don't think I'm a flight generally.
You don't? This doesn't describe you?
What?
Obsessive compulsive, panicky, rushing, drivenness, adrenaline junkie, busyholic. You know what? I should stop trying to give you a type and like impose that on you. I'll let you.
If that's what it means, I don't think I run from problems.
No, it's not running away from it in these cases, I guess.
I mean, I have fight or flight response in my head still.
No, I know. Let's see the 4F distortions of attachment and safety instinct. So this is kind of what you're like when you're in interpersonal relationships. Fight, control to connect, rage to be safe. Flight, perfect to connect, perfect to be safe. Freeze, no way, I'll connect, hide to be safe. And fawn, merge to connect, grovel to be safe.
So I guess I'm in this case, I feel like I'm more of a flight fawn.
I agree.
But I don't understand why it's called flight.
It doesn't mean you're running away. It means that you're in running mode, which is like
I see.
Moving mode. It's flight.
I'm in flight mode. The plane is flying. I'm in flight.
Yeah, but it's also like
I'm in flight. Oh, okay.
Right. Maybe if you're facing a lion, to use an example that we used last time, you would be running away. But
I wouldn't fight the lion.
If the thing is that like something is happening, you're in go. You're in like go mode.
So I'm definitely in go mode and dealing with things. I think when we talked about my mother last episode and
exactly.
dealing with her death, I think I was in go mode, and I called up all the people to tell them what happened. I took on when my dad I think my dad was in freeze.
Right. Yeah, I would say so too.
Yeah. Was in freeze mode. And fawning. What's an example of fawn?
Like what they would do?
Yeah.
In a different situation.
Let's say in my situation, what would be? So my mother passed. I told you that whole story last episode. What would someone in each of those 4 Fs do? So freeze would be like maybe it's kind of what my father did. My dad kind of didn't know. He kind of hid away in the moment. He couldn't. It doesn't now. That's not fair. He did a lot of things he had to do, but emotionally, I felt like he especially.
That's the thing. We can't help our response. It's just what we automatically do.
Yeah, right? He did the things he needed to do. I don't mean that. But I mean, in general, I feel like that was the emotional response. I was in a kind of emotional go mode for sure. So I guess maybe I am flight in that sense. But how would fawn work there? Well,
that's the weird thing. To me, fawn seems more...
It's a different type of situation.
Yeah. To me, fawn is more like when you're in an interpersonal situation. So for example, if someone's yelling at you.
So in that kind of situation, I would definitely try to like kill him with kindness. Is that an example of fawning?
Yeah, I guess so.
I would try to compromise.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
But
so maybe now it seems like you're just a healthy person who knows how to use what they need to use.
Well, I try to. I generally don't think do I ever fight? I don't think in this way.
Like you don't argue back with someone or.
Well, I do, but I try to do it now more with my mom. I definitely, she would say I was always talking back, but to me, it was just trying to explain myself. I can be defensive. I don't know. That's kind of a negative thing. Like, what does that mean when I get really defensive?
To me, it just seems like you're still doing the thing that you're just trying to fix it.
So it's flight.
It doesn't seem to me like, to me, well, okay. Can I read this paragraph for you that I've had?
Yeah, read the paragraph.
Okay. So extreme flight types are like machines with the switch stuck in the on position. They are obsessively and compulsively driven by the unconscious belief that perfection will make them safe and lovable. They rush to achieve. They rush as much in thought, obsession, as they do in action, compulsion. As children, flight types variably respond to their family trauma on a hyperactive continuum. The flight defense continuum stretches between the extremes of the driven A student, exhibit A, and the ADHD dropout running amok. Flight types relentlessly flee the inner pain of their abandonment with the symbolic flight of constant busyness. I don't know about your inner pain of abandonment, but the symbolic flight of constant busyness to me.
It's interesting. I can hear my issue with some of this is not that they're incorrect, is that I think pretty early on I recognized these possible downsides to responding in certain ways. And I literally tried to account for those,
Right.
And respond in a healthy way. So I'm not saying I'm like a great.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I don't know.
But I do try to respond in a healthy way.
I think I was looking at this more in terms of like interpersonal relationships. And if someone's angry at me, I totally go into I go into like fawn type. Like I can't have I get like, are you mad at me?
People pleasing aspects, right? So I'm like that there's the fawn type there too.
Yeah, the people pleasing.
But it to a degree, there's a certain point at which, but what would an example in an interpersonal relationship be of the flight type be?
Oh, good question.
I think of flight in terms of like the traumatic family drama I went through, and and then I think of fawn in terms of like an interpersonal thing.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
I'm definitely not like I don't go on the attack on someone usually. I'm not fighting in that sense.
So with parents, if they're mad at me or if I feel like something's happening that is like going to be a fight or something, like a fight between us, my first response is, well, the fawn response is also to like try to know what kind of mood they're in, to like realize what is about to happen, so that like, so if I can interpret their mood, I can kind of.
Sounds like empathy to me.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the good side of it. The bad side of it is you're often more attuned to other people's emotions than you are to your own. So that's my first thing. The second thing, if that doesn't work, is for me to yell back at people.
So you do fight. Like, you do have a fight aspect.
It's a weird combo.
Here's the thing. I don't usually do that, but I do have a certain sense of like, I want to have it both ways. I want to like be right, but I also want to fawn. So like, I definitely have those two. I think that's the flight fawn thing going on there.
I mean, you might, I shouldn't be like guessing you. I think I found that one paragraph and I was like, this is you. You're stuck in the on position. But maybe not.
That's true for a lot of things,
Yeah.
Well, okay.
But I don't know in interpersonal relationships, right? That's different than other stuff.
Well, there are some. We got the Fs. Those are all the Fs.
Some ideas
not
of
the Fs that I heard about in the past, but
no. What kind of Fs have you heard about in the past, Josh?
Anyway, moving on.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I think this is a useful book. But I mean, maybe we're being a bit misleading with this whole 4 Fs, which F is Josh, because really we all have tendencies towards maybe one or the other in certain situations, but they're all potential reactions, right?
Are you arguing for some nuance here
instead
of
that's right.
categorically labeling somebody one thing?
That's exactly
defining them.
Yeah.
By that.
That's exactly what I'm doing. Yeah. And I don't know if this will be useful or not, but there's something called the window of tolerance. I don't know if you've heard of this before, but the idea.
I know about windows and I know about tolerance.
Oh, okay. But window of tolerance isn't unknown.
And my favorite word is defenestrate, which means to throw somebody out a window.
That's right.
It could be throwing them out of a window of tolerance.
Wow. I love that image. Let's throw someone out a window of tolerance.
I don't know what that means, but it sounds interesting.
It sounds interesting. I'd like to share my screen with you for a moment.
It definitely didn't sound interesting. You're like, look at my screen and shut up.
So here's the window of tolerance through which you will defenestrate a person.
Oh, it's literally a window. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, so it's a window between hyperarousal. I'm gesturing with my hands, which is where you're hyper aroused, which means like that can be the fight or flight response, anxious, angry, out of control, like my cat sounds like she is right now, if you can hear them in the background. And it's one of those things, it's just it's a reaction. It's not a conscious choice. It's just the way that your body reacts. Yeah. Just depending on person to person. There's hyperarousal, which is at the extreme of like go, 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 fix, or run, or fight.
So hyperarousal is like your body wants to fight or run away.
Essentially, yeah.
It's not something you choose. It's just a reaction that takes you over.
Right. So when you're triggered, during either a traumatic event or something that reminds you of a traumatic event, this is what happens to someone's
Okay. You get
body.
hyper aroused.
Hyper aroused or hypo aroused.
Hypo aroused.
Hypo aroused. So understandably, that would be the opposite. So if you're like zoned out, numb, frozen, maybe in some ways you might have been hypo aroused in some of what you were talking about, being unable to cry. I mean, that makes sense for hypo arousal because there's a numbing, right?
Maybe. Well, is shock fall under that?
Yeah. So shock. So the freeze. So you've got like fight and flight in the hyper arousal, and you've got freeze in the hypo arousal. So
what if it wasn't that I was like totally in shock, but more that I was like, I went into, like I said, like pragmatic mode. Like,
yeah,
I just kind of, I compartmentalized.
Yeah.
What does compartmentalizing fall under? Is that a form of like,
I think compartmentalizing is useful. So again, I'm not a mental health professional. This is just stuff I'm taking from others.
Compartmentalizing is something you choose. So this doesn't count, I guess, towards that.
I don't think you choose it. I think it's kind of.
You don't think so?
Well, I guess I shouldn't say that so certainly, but like.
If I think in my head, I'm going to put this away in a box for now and focus on this.
I mean, you could say whatever you want, but I find myself compartmentalizing unintentionally. Just like I find myself unable to stop thinking about something, even if I want to stop thinking about something. Do you have the ability to tell yourself, I don't like to really decide, I don't want to think about that thing and always be able to put it aside? That doesn't
think about, not necessarily.
Right.
But in order to operate and especially like I said, pragmatic mode, in order to set a task for myself and a goal and follow it, I have to be able to compartmentalize a bit, right? That's a bit of a choice, right?
Yeah. Honestly, I think if you're able to compartmentalize and deal with things the way you need to, then you're within that window of tolerance. So that's
the window of tolerance.
That's the window. Instead of throwing someone out of, so if you're not in hyperarousal or hypoarousal, you're able to cope with whatever's happening. You're able to handle those stressors. You're able to compartmentalize. It doesn't mean that nothing's going on.
So you could be not one of the 4Fs? Or does fawning fall under the window?
Fawning is more, that F is more something that the author Pete Walker talks about as a response that people develop in interpersonal relationships after having to deal with difficult figures in a way. So like
interpersonal stuff.
More interpersonal stuff. The fawn is interpersonal, right? Like how can you fawn in
how could I fawn when dealing with a death in front of me necessarily, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's not quite the same. It's more like when there's a sense of danger, is your response to flee or fawn, or that sense of danger in an interpersonal setting. That's where the fawn comes in. But that's more a particular complex PTSD thing.
But freezing and shutting down or spacing out, that's hypoarousal as opposed to hyperarousal.
That's right.
Kind of like, and basically an under arousal. One's like an over and one's an under response.
Yeah. So all I wanted to say with this was that we all have our unique responses to trauma. And, there's stuff like, I don't even know if we mentioned flashbacks and nightmares and avoidance and things like that, right?
Flashbacks. I did have some dreams, but I didn't necessarily.
Yeah, nightmares.
It's sometimes I'm hesitant to call them nightmares. Like I actually had nightmares leading up to like my mom's passing, as I said. Like I had a nightmare that she died and then she died.
Jeez. Would you have remembered those dreams if she hadn't died though? I know that's a really messed up thing to say. I've dreamt that family members have died, and I think I would forget the dream unless something actually happens, which isn't to say anything because
it's hard for me to know. It was pretty devastating at the time. It was one of the more devastating nightmares I had because it felt so real. That was what was weird about it. But I mean, it's interesting. I told you when my grandmother died and I went to a second funeral within a few months, that was bringing back all the memories of the first funeral I went to was triggering.
Yeah.
Like there's things that I don't know if that counts as a flashback, but like, that spot of blood on the carpet triggered me.
Yeah, I think that's very much a kind of a flashback.
Or I'd be triggered by things that didn't happen anymore too. Still, when I walk in my house and I kind of have this memory that my mom would ask me how school was that day. She would yell that to me from upstairs and then it being quiet again. I don't know what that counts as.
But I mean, it's an event that that triggered you. It doesn't have to, maybe the absence of an event.
The absence of an event.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, it's things that aren't there anymore for this type of situation that triggers it. Some people, they've had something horrible happen to them, and then things can trigger that memory. For me, the absence really, really gets me.
Yeah, and that makes sense, especially when it's, with death of a loved one.
Have you ever experienced any flashbacks or anything like that?
Not that I can think of. I know you're trying to get a story out of me, Josh. I don't think that's not what this edition is for. Sorry, Josh. We'll get to me, don't worry. I did have a quote also that I wanted to share. Do you think that is this quote time, Josh?
It's always quote time, Maya.
So this quote is by poet Jessica Katoff. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Sorry, either way. And she says, "My past is an armor I cannot take off, no matter how many times you tell me the war is over."
You always put your guard up.
Yeah. And I mean, it's also just the idea that people can say you're not in danger, but if that's what and I would say this is more relevant to things like PTSD and sort of violent trauma, maybe war and torture and maybe relationship stuff, lots of stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't know though. I don't know if you relate to that or not, but.
Well, I do, in a sense that like I said, this really, I think about death a lot.
Right.
I do. I think about it a lot, and I think about other people dying, but I think about myself dying, and I think about the short time that we have. And that guard is kind of always that kind of armor, you want to say, is like that. I can't take that off. Like I have to always operate knowing this.
Yeah.
With this kind of more at the forefront of my mind. And I mean, sometimes that could be a very motivating thing to get something done, but other times it doesn't let me relax in a way.
Yeah.
So I guess I can relate in that sense.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, you seem very self-aware and like, I don't know, you never went to therapy or anything after stuff with your mom?
That's the thing. It's funny. When I came back, I remember the Rabbi Laser, was it right?
Rabbi
I
Laser,
remember him saying to me, like,
yeah.
So Josh, I think you should consider going to talk to someone, like.
Oh, that's nice.
And I was like, well, he said that, and I was like, I'm good. I'm fine. He's like, but really, I think it would help. I'm like, do I seem like I need help? Like what?
Yeah.
What? I couldn't figure out why this isn't like right after. This is like, I came back and visited from Los Angeles, maybe. I don't even.
Oh, this is a while later. Okay.
This is a while later. I don't know if it was then, but it was a while later. And he was like, yeah, I think you, he's like, you should do this. And I'm like, but I think I'm fine. And he was like, you might think you're fine, but, and anyways, it felt like he was spending his time trying to convince me that I wasn't fine. And I started wondering, am I not fine? I think I'm fine. I'm like, look, I talk to my friends. I feel good with my friends. I'm actually I was in a very good place emotionally. And he was like, yeah, but it's there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with it. You don't have to be not fine to go to the therapist.
I was like, is the therapist going to be free?
Well, when you were in university, it would be partially kept. Well, listen, like, I think it's more like cleaning your house. Like, you don't have to wait until it's a disgusting mess to clean it. That's like, it's just a little bit and you dust. It's dusting.
But I feel like I'm dusting when I talk to my friends and I do a podcast and I share for 2 hours my traumatic experiences. I'm dusting right now.
All right. If you say so. All right.
Dr. Ishai. I mean, I have to trust you because you are a doctor.
I am a doctor. I'm not that kind of doctor. Do not trust me with anything. Please. Don't trust me with anything but your essays, okay? Yeah.
So do you feel like, we're talking about different types of trauma, do you feel like you had, of course, there's the trauma of death and things like that, but there's also, I feel like something people deal with a lot more is the trauma of like, that happens with relationships. Breakups are very, very traumatic to people. In fact, they're so traumatic, people feel guilty often. Like, other people have dealt with so much worse. Why do I feel so terrible after this breakup? But yet it really is a traumatic experience for a lot of people, right? When you break up and suddenly it's like listening to a certain song is a traumatic experience, right? Going to a certain restaurant, a traumatic experience. Hearing the person with the same name as the person you dated is a traumatic experience, right? I think that's a more like, when we're talking about trauma, that's like a very common trauma, right?
Right. No, I think that's a good example. And I feel like I brought this up at one point.
Relationship episode, maybe?
Yeah, I probably brought it up at the relationship episode because I remember feeling like it was such a stupid thing. It was just like first or second year university. I felt like it was such a stupid thing that I was so upset about this breakup. So not only did I feel bad about what had happened, but I felt bad that I felt bad. Just piling it on, like
Yeah.
I shouldn't feel this way. And I didn't share it with anyone. I didn't really have I wasn't really, my close friends had kind of moved away at that point, and I hadn't really engaged with the university people. So I was kind of
Yeah.
there alone. And yeah, I was really not doing well. And I remember I was like, okay, my place is too messy in my mind. It was like, this is too messy. I should probably just go to someone.
It's good that you recognize that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a healthy thing to do.
Yeah. Although even when I went there, I was like, this isn't enough of a reason to be here. I shouldn't be here. Like, is this bad enough?
I feel like you have like trauma imposter syndrome. Yeah, like I don't feel like I deserve to call it trauma and be
Yeah.
traumatized. Like other people have been through worse things. Like, is this really trauma? Should I be here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have this belief. I've actually said it. I remember telling my best friend this because I had a lot of friends growing up that would say like they would tell me something and they'd be like, "Well, your mom's dead. Like, what does this mean
Mm.
compared to you? Like, why am I upset about this?"
Oh,
And
well,
I'd be
it's not
like,
a,
"I'm
yeah.
like, yeah, you don't. Things are as bad as they make you feel in a sense.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you feel traumatized, then you're traumatized. That's
Yeah.
the end, and it's worth dealing with that and not
Yeah.
ignoring it like it shouldn't be trauma. What does that even mean,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If it's traumatic, it's traumatic. The end.
Yeah.
If the breakup, if it's it also depends how much something means to you. Sometimes I feel bad for the opposite reason, right? Because
Mm.
people don't often understand the intricacies of my relationship with my mother and how she could be kind of abusive.
So
That
you're like,
I
no,
don't
it's
that
kind of good. No,
almost. I mean, it's not obviously.
I'm
We
sorry.
got into it before. No, no,
Yeah,
no.
that was
You're
yeah.
right. That is kind of how my brain goes sometimes. Like I said, my brother famously said to me, like, "I'm happy she's dead." Like that sounds horrible, but that's how nuanced it was. That again, I don't want to put my brother on the spot. You have to. It's so much to understand that we had a
Yeah.
very complex family dynamic where it was sometimes it was hell, and that itself was traumatic.
Right.
My family life before that, right? It sounds almost bad to say, but yeah, some things got better after my mom passed. And
Yeah.
I feel bad admitting that in some ways because people think, what are you talking about? How could you feel better when your mom
Mm.
dies? And it's like, I feel bad too. I have to explain
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch of trauma about that. And there's a lot of things that I do feel sometimes that kind of PTSD or that sort of, memory of dealing with that situation and going through it
Yeah.
is hard. But you can feel more than one thing at once.
Of course. Yeah.
All that being said, when someone would come to me and they'd say, "My parents just got divorced."
Yeah.
Oh my God, like, what am I talking about? You lost your mom. Like, no,
Yeah.
that's a traumatic experience too. In fact,
Yeah.
for all I know, it could be harder for you to deal with your parents' divorce than it was for me to deal with my mom's death. That sounds horrible, but it could be,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And we are not ones to judge. Everybody's situation is different. For all you know, your parents being together was literally everything to you. That
Yeah.
relationship you were in, what might have been the only thing giving you joy, and it's gone.
Yeah.
That's super traumatic when that happens. So I don't judge other people's trauma, and I don't think anybody should. And if someone tells you something is traumatic, believe them.
Yeah.
That's what I think. And so I just want to say, Aya, when you were dealing with that stuff, and I hope moving forward, I mean, look, I'm telling you a bunch of stuff here that happened with me, and I could tell there's aspects of you like, oh, what do I have that I don't have anything that compares to that. That's not. You've obviously been devastated by things and traumatized by things in your life, like all of us have, here and there, and all of it matters.
Yeah.
I just want to say that.
Thanks.
And we don't compare scars, as they say.
Right.
And I feel like I guess I'm in a place to say that because I've had so many people say to me, like, "Josh, I can't. What is my problems are nothing compared to yours." Well,
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know. I feel kind of
Yeah.
happier than you, so maybe not.
Yeah.
It depending on
Yeah.
the time. So
Right.
I just wanted to say that.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And I think that's good to let people know. Anyone who's feeling trauma imposter syndrome, is that what you called it earlier?
Yeah, trauma
Yeah.
imposter syndrome.
Trauma imposter syndrome. Yeah.
Copyright Josh Lippman, 2021.
Yeah, because part of what helps you get through it is accepting that it is a big thing and that it does matter. And I remember even
Exactly.
just the therapist saying, like, for people, because I was like, this is stupid, why do I even care? And she was like, for a lot of people, a breakup can feel almost like a death. It's like dealing with that because yeah. So
Hmm.
I just felt like, okay, so it's an okay reason to be upset. It doesn't make me shallow or kind of weak or something, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, and I think that's an important thing to recognize.
Yeah.
We're talking about there's different types of like I was thinking about how I didn't feel so I weirdly have like a weird comparison that I can make in my own life.
Mm.
Because people used to ask me this question all the time with my mom, right? They used to be like, do you think now looking back, it's kind of a weird question. They used to be like, do you think it was better that it was her death, like it was a sudden death? It's better than dealing
What?
with like
Oh, that's
would you
so
think it's better to be
strange.
sudden or would you want it to go
That's a
through
strange,
or if it
yeah.
was something that you like that you knew was gonna happen and it was
Mm.
what do you call that? Like
Yeah, like a slow, I don't know, like basically they're asking you to imagine a different death and see if that would have affected you more.
yes, I'm
Yeah.
guessing there was some context there and it wouldn't just pop
Yeah,
out of
yeah.
nowhere. But
Right,
I
right,
remember
right. I'm
thinking
sure they
like, well,
meant
I don't
well.
yeah,
Mhm.
like I don't know. This is all I
Yeah.
know. But actually since then I have gotten to so I have another story
Yeah.
to share. But there's a difference I think between like because my mom passed, yes, there's a trauma in what I experienced with losing her,
Yeah.
but there's also I think mostly it was grief.
Mm.
It ended. It happened.
Right.
It happened, and I can reflect on it, and I can deal with it. I can move past it. Right?
Mm.
There's something to be said about ongoing trauma,
Mm.
which is different, and I think that can in some ways be. I don't want to compare. It depends on the person, but to a lot of people that can be harder to deal with, right? Because it's not. It hasn't ended.
Right.
It's still going. When you think about it, well, I have a friend who like his relationship ended when his girlfriend he found out was cheating on him for 1 out of the 3 years
Oh,
that they
gee.
were dating. But when he found that out, I mean, it was just over. He's like this. He said
Yeah.
he told me the relationship was like he's like like trying to hold the relationship. It felt like holding a headless corpse. It was just like it had no head. Like
Yeah.
he's holding a corpse that is it's done. There's no more. There's nothing ongoing. Once he found out about
Mhm.
that, it was over. You couldn't rescue that,
Yeah.
and that's sad. But then there was more of a grief to deal with there, right?
Right.
Whereas there's a lot of people who deal with certain trauma with the relationship because there's still a question of can we get back together? What if I change this? What if I change that? Is it really dead?
Oh, like that constant uncertainty kind of
Yes.
thing.
And the
Hmm.
constant uncertainty, I think it creates this ongoing trauma in
Hmm.
many ways for a lot of people. And especially when something isn't really gone, but it
Yeah.
maybe it is, maybe it's not.
Yeah.
And I feel like I experienced that when with my father. So I told the whole story about my mother, but not long after that, I'm saying not long after that, like a couple years, like few years,
Mm.
very few years, right? I think I was 18, 19 years old, maybe.
Mm.
I remember I was going to I was on my way. I was heading to Mexico with my friends, and I was with my girlfriend at the time, Shirley was her name. So her and my best friend Roman, and a few others. We went to Mexico together. But just as I was about to leave for Mexico, literally like either that day or the next day,
Mm.
my dad came up to me and he was like, so I just went, I went and got something checked. Um, I had this rash or something. And he was like, yeah, I think it turns out I have cancer. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, but I think it's okay. It's okay. They said it's like one of the curable kinds. I think they said it's gonna be
Yeah.
just fine. So don't worry. I'm like, okay.
Dude.
So my dad told me he has cancer, and then I went to Mexico. And so what got me through Mexico, what got me through that is I was able to kind of put it out of my mind, and that my mind just
Yeah.
kind of said, he said it's one of those curable things. Maybe it's like one of those
Yeah.
in my mind, like is it some
Just
skin
lob it
thing we could just
off.
cut
Yeah.
off and it's
Yeah.
fine. It just sounded scary. And I
Yeah.
went to Mexico and I didn't think about it too much. It kind of popped into my head a couple of times.
Of course.
And I was
Yeah.
like, nah, it's fine. It's fine.
Mm.
They said it's
Yeah.
curable is curable. The end.
Yeah.
Right. I remember getting back from Mexico and there was this like ominous mood in my house.
Mm.
Again, at this point, my house just consists of me, my brothers, my dad,
Yeah.
and I think my cat, Sammy.
Oh.
Uh, I miss Sammy. Anyway,
Oh.
by the way, losing a pet is also very traumatic, and don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise.
No. I dread the day that this guy. Okay, I'm not gonna.
Again, the more
The more you love them.
you have love for something, someone, like the more traumatic it is. But it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
But anyway,
My cat is hugging me right now. So
I know right now I'm
it's
watching. It's bringing. I'm thinking about it because you're hugging your cat as you listen to this
she's
story.
hugging. She crawls up to my
She's hugging you.
shoulder,
She's
and
fawning. She's in
she's
fawn mode.
fawning. Yeah. Well, she
Oh,
wanted attention, and I wasn't giving it to her. So she's like, "I know how to get your attention. I'll just crawl up onto your shoulder
she's like,
a
stop
little
paying
bit."
attention to Josh. He doesn't
Yeah,
know.
it's pretty cute. It's like a semi hug she's got going on here, or she's just
Oh,
sort of hanging off. You hanging off?
and she's
Are
so
you
you're wearing
hanging off?
black, and your hair is
Yeah,
black,
you can't
and the
really
cat is
tell. Yeah,
black. You're all just kind
yeah,
of blending together.
we're just blending. Yeah,
And then you have this like white background. It's very interesting. Anyway.
so interesting. Kitty, we're interesting. You know? Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. All right. Tell me about your traumatic experiences now. Got cat hair in my face.
So there was this ominous kind of mood in the house.
Yeah.
And I remember asking like, what's going on to my brothers?
Yeah.
And they're like, you didn't hear? I'm like, no, I was in Mexico.
Yeah.
And it turns out the cancer, it's not what they thought it was.
Mm.
I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, it's much worse than they thought it was. I'm like, what does that mean? And instead of it being something that was curable, they said it was something super, super rare that like maybe wasn't curable. And they said he had about a month to live.
Oh my God.
That was a big,
Yeah.
things were moving really, really fast. Again, my mother had just died
Yeah.
pretty recently still.
Yeah.
Here's how I know it. My brother Alex wasn't even 18 yet.
Jeez.
I think he was 17. Yeah, I must have been 19 or 20, right?
Mm.
And I just remember thinking, like, if my dad goes and like he'll be an orphan, like that's how this is kind of crazy,
Yeah.
right? My kid couldn't help but think about my grandmother who lost both their parents when she was 17, in the Holocaust. So suddenly we were in again. My dad's sisters came down, and everybody was trying to figure out. It felt almost like a foregone conclusion. Like, oh my God, he's gonna be dead soon. We need to figure out what's gonna go on. Like, what are the kids gonna do? Everything was about the kids again, the Littman
Yeah.
boys, right? And I was a little older now, right? An adult, kind of, in undergrad.
Yeah.
But they started planning for after immediately. They were all talking about what's going to happen with the money. And I'm like, what are we talking about? Like, so weird.
Ugh.
I didn't want to be talking about that stuff. Like,
yeah.
Anyways, my dad's brother, actually, my uncle Mel, he lives in Israel. He's a doctor, actually deals with stuff like cancer all the time. And he had a young daughter who was like 3 years old, 4 years old. He's a religious Jewish man, Orthodox Jewish man, but he's a very good medical doctor as well. And he's a lot of kids, but one of them had a neuroblastoma, like brain cancer type of thing, and was also given like no time to live, basically, and that kid, she's around today.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So my uncle has some methods and some things, and he does something called orthomolecular medicine, which again, it's not like we're going to replace traditional medicine, but it supplements it, right?
Right.
Basically, his whole idea is that hospitals kind of have a one size fits all sort of thing. And he tailors like individual treatment to people. So basically, he can't have too many patients at once, but
right.
You can really, really focus on an individual and tailor treatment to them. And it's very time consuming. But of course, he did that with my dad, right? His brother and my aunts.
Yeah.
So suddenly my dad's family, I can be honest, it can be sometimes a little strange, and they'll tell you that, right? They're not the most sentimental. Right.
Well, they're super religious, but he's not at all, right? Like
only my dad's brother.
Oh, okay. It's only the one brother that's super religious.
Yes, okay, just him.
Okay.
My dad's family, I feel like there's a string of like on the spectrumness going on in my dad's side. Like again, it's just socially sometimes a little strange, but it turns out when shit hits the fan, they really came together.
That's great. Yeah.
And I was very impressed with that. They all just kind of took on different roles. My Aunt Darlene, she really got in charge of the business and financing stuff and try to figure out finances. And my Aunt Sheila was like boots on the ground, like administering, vitamins and stuff. And my uncle was in Israel. He did come a few times, but he was the one kind of giving instructions on what to do. And then we had the hospital as well.
All right.
Anyways, they were like, we're going to try to fight this thing. So we did a mixture of like chemotherapy for him and this orthomolecular medicine. Basically, we take it. Basically, one of the big parts of that was, some people have heard of it, vitamin C treatment. It was like super high dose vitamin C, sodium ascorbate or ascorbic acid, something like that. And he would take it intravenously.
Really? I didn't know that was like a thing that actually.
It
Okay.
is, and there's mixed research
Yeah.
on this, but some people,
Okay.
swear by it.
Cool.
But it turns out one of the things that, I did like a ton of research myself on cancer. I
Of
knew,
course.
well, it turns out
Yeah.
I didn't know very much about cancer.
Yeah.
Suddenly I knew a lot more about cancer looking up, because one of my jobs I felt was trying to give my dad some hope, because my dad is not one of those people who was like, son, hey, it's a tough time, and we're dealing with a lot, and it's
No.
I
Sounds
can't
like
say it's
you
going to
were the
be great,
one.
but we're going to get through this, son. And my dad was
Yeah.
like, I'm going to die.
And you're like, you're not gonna die. Look, I found all
Yeah.
this research.
My
Yeah.
dad has a lot of anxiety, and sometimes, he doesn't say the right things. I'm gonna give you actually an example tying back to that last episode. So, segue side note a little here. How I told you, like I said to my mother was like, I'm gonna die, kind of similarly, and
Yeah.
I was like, oh, you're not gonna die, right? Cut forward a few years before the cancer thing with my dad, and my brother Daniel got pneumonia.
Oh, jeez.
He was very sick,
Yeah.
but like I'm like, okay, he's gonna be fine. He's gonna be fine
Yeah.
ultimately, right? But my dad was freaking out. He didn't know, like, I mean, like freaking out. I remember trying to calm him down, and he's like, oh, like he's seeing all the worst case scenarios. I'm like, Dad, it's fine. Like, it's pneumonia. Like he's young. He's not gonna die. And my dad was like, yeah, well, you said that before. Again, we're talking about traumatic experiences. That one stuck with me a little bit.
Dude,
He said that,
what the fuck?
and then he went. I think he went. Yeah, he went, like, I don't know if he went grocery shopping or something. I was kind of left there. Yeah, that made
Uh,
me cry. That made me cry
of course. Of course it did.
because, of course, in my mind, it's like not just that I mean, the logic of it is, I understand the logic of when I said it and why I said it, and it's not like I feel like it was my fault or anything. But the fact that also he saw it that way, I don't know, it was hard.
Yeah, because it's already something that I'm sure you felt bad about. And then to have
Mhm.
someone kind of say something like, yeah,
The inference is that I don't know what I'm talking about. My
yeah,
optimism is misplaced.
right.
My hope is misplaced. I never really worded it that way before, actually. I think that's the feeling I had. And
Mm,
he
yeah,
really, that was sharp. That was like a knife right
yeah.
there. And of course, he went out for a little bit. He came back. I think he also went out. I think he started smoking. We were getting very frustrated with him. I think to deal with stuff, he started smoking. We are like, "What are you doing?" Especially, and by the way, later with the cancer, I'm like, "What are you doing smoking cigarettes?" Like,
Oh my
you have
God.
cancer. He's like, "Well, I already have it." Um,
Doesn't work like
anyway,
that. Oh my God.
but you go back and you come back,
Yeah,
kind of, again, he was dealing with a lot. I told you my dad
yeah,
really, it really affected him, and he
yeah,
blamed
of
himself
course.
for a lot of stuff. But anyways,
Mm.
he came back, and again, he's not very sentimental, but he did come back and he said to me, "I shouldn't have said that to you.
Oh, okay.
Should not have said that to you. I'm sorry."
Oh, okay.
I appreciated him, saying that, and it wasn't about me. It was his
Yeah,
own anxiety.
right.
My dad, I mentioned before, I think he's got anxiety. And so we weren't just fighting the cancer. I felt like I was fighting my dad's anxiety about all of this,
Hmm.
because of course, he saw the worst case scenario. He was basically, again, the doctor said you might have a month to live or something. He's like thinking, I got a month to live.
Yeah,
So immediately he was like, well, we're focused on here's the money and stuff. I'm like, I don't care. Let's try to get you well. He's like,
yeah,
he didn't, but he
yeah.
did what he was told. He went through hell. Again, chemotherapy, all that stuff is hell. It makes you depressed
Mm.
as well. It's tough. It's really, really tough. I'm sure people who dealt with family members who've had cancer, that's really a really tough experience. And it wasn't just traumatic for me,
Mm.
it was traumatic for him. And I was traumatized by understanding his trauma
Right.
of going
Yeah.
through it. I kept empathizing with that.
Yeah. Empathy's a bitch sometimes, huh?
Yeah, it is. When you feel other people's pain, that means you feel pain,
It
right?
sucks. Yeah.
So
Oh.
I kept trying to figure out, okay, I thought, if I'm going to help my dad, I heard that positivity can help, right? We've all heard
Mm.
this. Yeah, that positivity should be
Yeah.
helpful. Then again, I always, my dad and I've always pointed out, what about those like really cranky old negative people that
Yeah.
seem to live forever? Maybe the negativity helps. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Maybe negativity helps because they're just letting it out. The other people are
Yeah.
keeping the negativity in. You just gotta be the crankiest you can.
Maybe.
Who knows?
So I had to do a lot of research. So I researched the shit out of cancer, and this one in particular. I can't even tell you right now the specific name for it again.
Mm.
Again, it was very rare, and I think they knew maybe one person in Japan who had this cancer or something.
Really? Oh wow, that's very rare.
Very
Yeah.
rare. I knew it was like a lymphoma leukemia kind of mix. They
Mm.
didn't know whether to call it a lymphoma leukemia. I think they called it a lymphoma at the time more, and now maybe they call it a leukemia, or is it vice
Mm.
versa? I don't know. they were learning about it. So again, that didn't give us hope. It's like, we don't know anything about
Yeah.
this cancer. We're just going to throw all the chemotherapy at it and hope for the best. And my uncle's regimen also was like, all right, we're going to try this vitamin C treatment. And
Yeah.
literally there was a point where we were in the hospital with him. And I remember this because the hospital, they were they don't want to say yes to anything that isn't like approved
Yeah.
typically. So they're like, yeah, we don't want you to do this vitamin C stuff, even though we haven't heard of any negative. Like the most negative side effect was apparently you feel a little cold and have to pee. Like, and that's the whole thing about vitamin C treatment. Even though anything seems to kill cancer in a petri dish, well, but the levels you need in a human usually are much more, and that could hurt you. But the thing is, it doesn't seem to hurt you when you give like a hugely high dose of vitamin C.
Oh.
So it seemed worth doing this. So it was like an ultra dose vitamin C thing. So we basically, when the nurses, like doctors, they weren't looking, like I like guarded the door, and my aunt would like mix it into his IV bag.
That's so funny.
I'm like, oh, the doctor's coming, quick. And like she's shaking the bag because it's looking a little yellow because it's like, it's not clear anymore. And we prayed they didn't, and they never found out.
Yeah.
So we're like, we really took these weird risks.
That's so funny.
I remember during this time, it was very difficult. I actually got into 2 plays. I was acting, in the undergrad. One of them was Little Shop of Horrors. And another one was this other short play that I was in at the time. And I started missing a few rehearsals because I was driving my dad to and from the hospital.
Yeah.
And they kicked me out of the play. I remember them saying like, yeah, they're making an example of me basically. I didn't miss much. And I knew all my lines. I knew everything.
Did you tell them you were driving your dad to chemo?
So I didn't tell them at the time. So after she said that, I'm like, well, here's what's been going on.
Yeah.
And she seemed to feel bad. And she got back to me and she was like, hey, so, I feel really bad about this. And so we wanted to offer you some tickets to come see the play.
Fuck that. That's worse.
Yeah.
That's so much worse. Oh, great. Let me see the play that you kicked me out of for the dumbest reason.
I was ready for it anyway. I felt since that time I like won't watch Little Shop of Horrors. I feel like upset about that still. But anyway, I remember I would drive my dad to and from the hospital. And I still remember, again, to give you a sense of my dad here, right? I would drive him and I'd have to go in. And I'm like, well, let's just park at the hospital. He's like, no, they charge like way too much at the parking. And he's like, we're going to park. He's like, so we had to find parking like far away from the hospital and walk. And I'm like, Dad, you have cancer. Let's just go. He's like, no, they're not ripping me off. So literally, even now, like he was just caring about every penny. I mean, yeah, they do rip you off, by the way, at the hospitals. But still, like,
we all know
Dad,
that,
you're not in poverty. Like make their life a little more comfortable. But he could not stand or bear to pay
it's
extra
principle.
money.
It's the
park.
principle.
Yeah,
him,
on principle.
Right?
Again, when I make a movie about this stuff, it's this is the stuff that's going in the movie. No,
yeah, of course.
We're not paying to park.
No, we're gonna walk a kilometer. I don't care if it kills me.
Again, there was so many elements. I even remember like the rabbi and my uncle, like they all came and prayed around his bedside. I remember.
Oh, that's so creepy.
At one point, I know you really don't like religious stuff, but I thought it was actually kind of
it's well intentioned. I'm sure it was.
It was well intentioned.
Were they shuffling back and forth over his?
Oh yeah, exactly. They were.
I shouldn't make jokes like this. It's just
no. It's so they were again. My dad was not a religious person, but he couldn't help but
I guess so.
He was talking to the rabbi. Again, he thought, I'm gonna die. Like, it's worth looking into.
I guess.
Yeah. And there's some comfort in that. So at one point, the cancer spread to his brain. It turned out the cancer was in his brain. And so they chemoed his brain. They had to like stick a thing in his spine, basically through his spine. They had to chemo his brain. It sounds crazy, right? Again, at this point, we're thinking, this isn't looking good. I remember saying to him at the time, like, Dad, my graduation is coming up, my undergrad graduation. I was like, Dad, do you think, I remember asking him, like, are you going to come to my, will you come to my graduation? And he's like, I can't talk about it. He's like, I'm not going to, what do you mean? I'm going to be dead. I'm like, well, yeah, but let's say you're alive.
Yeah.
And he's like, Josh, I'm not going to be around. Like, there's no point in asking me that. And I remember, so he just wouldn't commit to that because I wanted him to like see a possibility of him still being alive.
Yeah.
And anyway, we get the results one day that they said, it looks like the cancer's gone. They were like, yeah, they did a test and the chemo seems to, or something. right? Seems to have worked.
something, and you're like, hee, that
We don't
stuff
know.
we
We can't
snuck
tell you
into
for
is, yeah,
it's
who knows?
possible. Maybe at the very least, it didn't seem to hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cancer seemed to be
Oh.
gone. And I remember even my dad was like confused. Like, what do you mean?
He's like, wait.
I'm gonna die though, right?
He's
and
like, this is disappointing. I thought
But
no.
here's the thing: they didn't know, even though the cancer seemed to be gone, they didn't know for sure. There was always they said at any
Oh,
moment it could come back.
that's terrifying. That's
Exactly.
terrifying.
So on one hand it was gone, but on the other hand, he thought at any moment it's just gonna come back and he's gonna be dead.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about like ongoing trauma, like
Right.
this was for us and our family, like even though he managed to kick it in the teeth then, it was an ongoing sort of thing. And my dad,
Yeah.
again, I remember I said to him, all right, so dad, it's my graduation and turns out you're alive. So are you gonna come then? And he was like you're gonna graduate anyway, right? Do I really? I'm like, so you just didn't want to go to my graduation. You were just using your potential death as an excuse not to come to my graduation. And he's like, well, you just kind of walk up on a stage and like it's boring. I'm like, yeah, it's boring, but it's what parents, again, they're not very sentimental
Yeah.
side of my family. I'm like, it's what people do. It's what
Aw.
parents do. They go to see their
Yeah.
kids. You know, my mom's not coming.
Yeah.
You know, I asked, but she's not interested, it looks like. So
That was a good.
and he ended up coming. He came to my graduation. I remember he forgot the camera and he just kind of used this, like he made it like a finger camera. He went, you know, he pretended to take a picture, a mental picture. He took a mental picture.
Mental picture.
But my dad ended up coming to my graduation, and you know, just before that, we thought he was going to
Yeah.
not be there. So that's a good story. But then was it after 5 years, they determined they finally will say like, okay, you're cancer free.
Mm.
Only after 5 years. So he reached 5 years, and they said, all right, we're cancer free.
Ooh.
And then in year 6, his cancer came back.
Oh my God! What the fuck?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Again, it's terrible. He was like, I don't want to have to go back to the hospital. I can't do this.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Oh, by the way, separate story just before this. Before that time, I remember we thought his cancer had come back.
Yeah.
Because he started breaking out in this rash. Like the first time he broke out in this rash all over his body. And he's like, oh, the cancer's back.
Oh.
There you go. And it turned out to be shingles.
Oh, I mean, that's shitty too. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, I remember we were all like, it's just shingles. We were cheering. And he was like, yeah. But shingles is terrible.
Yeah, shingles sucks so much.
But it wasn't cancer. So we were like really happy to hear it wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't
Poor
that
guy. Oh my God.
I know. So he dealt with the shingles, but then his cancer did come back in year 6. And I remember I said, Dad, I'm going to be graduating from USC.
Yeah.
Los Angeles, right? I said, will you come to my graduation? He's like, no, Josh, the cancer came back. This time I'm definitely going to be dead. You know how it is. It gets like resistant to the drugs. And this time there's no hope. So I can't come to that. I'm like, well, just hypothetically, Dad.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, you're still alive. Will you come to this graduation? And he's like, I mean, it's really far away. I mean, you have to travel like really far. It costs a lot of money. I'm like, so you just don't want to like travel. You just don't want to fly all the way to my graduation. He's like, well, it doesn't matter anyway, because I'm going to be dead for sure this time. So anyway, we went through another year to go through chemo all over again, hospital visits. I was in LA for part of this. So it was a little, you know, I think I was there for a little bit, but I wasn't as present this time. And he did, but I was always on the phone with him. Again, he spent a lot of time in the hospital. He really hates the hospital now, understandably. It was not a fun place to be.
Right, for sure.
A lot of terrible memories. I remember there was apparently a memory of him. He literally had to go to the bathroom at one point. He passed out on the way. Like, he just fell. Like, there were some really, really tough times in there. Anyway, the chemotherapy and the stuff that we did again, it seemed to work because they said, okay, the cancer seems to be gone again.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, there you go, Dad. Are you going to come to my graduation? He's like, so this would be a really much better story if he actually came, but he didn't fly. He was like, no, I'm not spending the money. So he didn't come to my graduation. But I had our good friend Grant, he showed up. He surprised me at my graduation. Nice. Yeah. And my cousin showed up.
So are you saying that the real cure for cancer is that someone has to have a graduation that you don't want to go to? That's what
I think there has to be something to, well, I don't want to say he didn't look forward to it, but
no, I'm just kidding.
Well, you get a reason to keep living.
Do you think that he's changed at all from that? Like, did you feel like he came out different?
I know he's changed. I can't always say some things are positive, some things are negative. He and I have gotten closer. I think over the time I've talked to him and he's more open in certain ways.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
But it's also traumatized him. Again, he thinks the cancer is going to come back at any second. So to this day,
yeah, well, he's been shown that by life. Yeah.
it's not just that. My dad's taking chemo to this day. He's still taking low dose chemo
Oh.
because it's never fully, they don't think it's really gone. They think it's just kind of there still. And even I feel this trauma of like at any time it could come back, but it's my responsibility, you know, when I talk to him to try to give him hope. So I try to give him hope. And meanwhile, I still do feel the trauma of that too.
Yeah.
I want my dad around. I want to have a parent, you know, who's going to be, you know, even if he doesn't show a lot of excitement for all of my stuff and sentiment, I want him to see. I feel like I'm always trying to prove myself to my dad, and I want him to be here to prove it to him, right?
Yeah.
Having a parent and mentor around is important in that sense.
Yeah.
But it's not just about me, you know. I want my dad to be around and enjoy more of life. My dad has gone through a lot of trauma in his life, you know. He grew up really poor. It was very, very, you know, we talked about that bullying episode. I didn't bring up my dad. Apparently he got bullied as a kid too. We talked about this, you know. He got bullied. He grew up poor. He had a lot of struggles. And then his relationship with my mother was not great. I think she was pretty abusive to him in many ways. And then he went through, you know, the death of my mother as well. And he blamed himself. And then he got cancer. And to this day, he's being told he can come back at any point. He's got a lot of anxiety. And sometimes you could say for good reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's been through a lot. But you know, he's got me and my brothers. We love him very much and try to let him know that he's fantastic. But this experience, I guess, is again another long story. But on my end, I feel like one thing after another with my parents. You know, I lost my mother suddenly, and then it felt like I was going through it very slowly. In some ways, I still feel like I'm going through it very slowly with my dad, and that it's not a grief; it's an ongoing trauma.
Yeah.
And I have nightmares that it's going to happen at any time, that my dad's not going to be here. Every time, he recently had an issue with his leg, like something happened with his leg, it wasn't working, and every time something happens, is the cancer back? Is the cancer back? Is this it? Yeah. So this was a very long story to basically give an example of this ongoing trauma that's not just for me but for him.
How do you deal with it?
So this one, it was almost easier for me to explain how I dealt with it, going, you know, with the support system and everything with my mother passing. This is a much harder one for me to deal with because, again, it's ongoing.
Yeah.
And sometimes I cannot think about it, and it helps. But then other times it fills my brain. It distracts me. There's things that you know, if I'm watching a TV show and there's like a cancer storyline or something, that'll get me. It really makes me think about, and you know, so people ask me that question, which is worse? Like, well, they both suck in different ways.
Yeah.
You know, like losing someone slowly or suddenly.
Oh God. Yeah.
You know, I guess we had the benefit, quote unquote, of knowing in that he could prepare some things, and he prepared a lot of things. I guess there was wills and,
but
and finances, but that's knowing. My dad's not the personality type to be like, I got these. If I have only a few days, then let's make the most of it. And I'm going to enjoy the last time I have here. My dad, all he can do is dote on his personality type is not good for the situation. So all he can do is kind of dote on the fact that it could happen at any time. And it's hard to get him out of that. And that in turn traumatizes me because I empathize with that. And I don't know how still to this day to really steer him away.
Yeah.
And also even make it even worse, the chemotherapy drugs, which I guess help keep him alive, but for half of every month he's depressed because of them. It causes depression.
Yeah.
So there's some good news here that my dad's still around. You know, they give him a month to live.
Yeah.
And he's still kicking. Like,
what is it, like 10 years ago they gave him a month to live?
10 years ago. It's been a decade. My dad is 70 now.
Wow.
He's 70 years old.
Yeah.
He didn't think he was I think he wasn't even 60 when he found out, you know, we thought he was going to be dying in his 50s, and now he's 70. I'm like, we have a very dark sense of humor when we talk to each other. And I'm like, well, Dad, at least if you die now, you'll be an old man, technically, like the definition of an old man. Like, you know, a 70-year-old man dying sounds a little more reasonable than like a 59-year-old, right?
It's true. It's true.
You know, we have a very dark sense of humor about this.
That's almost the easiest, or not the easiest. I feel like that's the best way to, because there's nothing, like, what can you do, right? So at least you make a joke, you feel a bit of relief. And
I told him, I said, Dad, even if you this whole time I told you were going to be okay and there was a chance and you kept saying no.
Yeah.
So in a sense, I was right and you were wrong. So even I said, even if you die tomorrow, like rest
I
easy
was
knowing
still
I was right.
oh, that's some good that's very funny. I mean, it's really
Yeah.
messed up, but it's also hilarious.
I said percentage wise here, like even if I'm wrong just once, like I'm for the
Yeah.
most part, I think you should. So I said, statistically speaking, I think you should trust me when I tell you you're going to be okay. I've been right this
Yeah.
whole time.
Yeah. Did he laugh?
Sometimes he smiles a little bit.
That's good.
Because of this ordeal, I make sure to call him pretty frequently, even though I'm not
Yeah.
at home. Like my brothers, until recently, both my brothers lived at home. I think Alex moved out.
Yeah.
That means they're around him more, but I've been calling him, I think, more. I still think I'm building our relationship and I really treasure and value the time we have because of this.
Yeah.
But even to this day, though, I am still trying to get him to find joy in life,
Yeah.
which is hard after dealing with such, again, and trauma can do that. It can hurt your ability to feel joy, right?
Yeah, for sure.
We talk about PTSD. I think he's got some major PTSD about this stuff.
Yeah.
I remember he said, I can't go back to the hospital. I can't go back.
Mm.
And this happened. He's like, I don't want to go back
Yeah.
there. He's like, please, like, don't make me go back there. That's how bad it was.
Yeah.
But he did say to me, I remember this. He said to me once, despite all of his negativity, I was visiting home and he said, I was trying to figure out why I'm still here. I don't know why I'm still around. And he said, I was thinking about it and I think maybe it's for you, for you guys.
Oh.
Again, one of the rare instances of sentiment I won't forget.
Yeah. Well, this has been part 2 of
no, I can't end it there. I want to ask you something.
Okay.
I've been talking now for a while and I obviously have these stories and I don't know, maybe you don't have these traumatic stories to share or that you want to share, but I know that you used to volunteer, right? For, was it the Women's Center? What was it called?
I mean, I'm still, it was the Women's Shelter and the Sexual Assault Center. They merged to make this shelter.
Doesn't sound like there's any trauma there at all.
Yeah, no, none at all.
No.
I was just working the crisis line for a bit. So yeah, you hear some very intense stories for sure. I mean, it's been kind of on pause because of the pandemic.
You work the crisis line.
Yeah, so the crisis line, so people calling for shelter or like something is happening to them or.
So that's like again, we talked about some very specific types of trauma, but what kind of trauma did you hear about or deal with?
So the majority was domestic abuse situations. So there were a few, I mean, I didn't, a lot of the shifts I took, I'd get maybe 2 calls or 3 calls, or sometimes you just get like supportive listening, which actually I'm much more comfortable with, which is just someone wants to talk about something. And
so I feel you've been this episode. You're basically, I basically just called in and this is.
Well, I wouldn't have asked the same kinds of questions because they tell you like, think about why you're asking a question. Are you asking a question because it's going to help like whatever you need to find out to help them, or because you're curious? And when I'm asking you questions in this, sometimes it's just I'm curious, like I just want to know. Whereas with them, it has to be kind of differently motivated. So
you help me too. I just want to say.
Oh well, thanks.
It helps. It is therapeutic.
I've had some ladies I had at least one woman who was like, I feel like we're friends. When do you work next? Like she would call and ask for me, and I was like, well, that's really sweet, but like. I mean,
you're making such a huge impact on people's lives that way, because again, when people call and they need someone to talk to when you're there, that's huge.
Well, I'm happy. I'm happy to hear that. I really enjoyed the supportive listening part. I don't feel like I'm the best suited for kind of that, having to figure out who to call. Like sometimes it's like they're in a situation and they need to, you need to figure out like, okay, we need to get you out of there. You need to pack a bag and like be really careful about it. Or like you have to find out if they're safe. Like sometimes they're not really telling you exactly what's wrong and you don't know, you have to find out why. Like, is it that someone's listening in?
Talk about ongoing trauma. That's literally in the middle of traumatic. There's traumatic events like memories and things that trigger. And then there's physical trauma people deal with. Like this all, we haven't really dived into all different types, but you dealt with some more immediate traumatizing things that people had to deal with.
Sometimes if I wasn't getting a lot of calls, I would read through the notes from previous calls. And some of the stuff on there is just, I mean, I was amazed at how often this happens. Like, I think I didn't think domestic abuse was that common.
Mm.
And then you live in a city of what, 400,000 people, and you're just constantly getting
Oh,
calls about it and reading stuff about it. And it's like, oh,
I'm
okay.
glad you guys existed as a means to call. And
Yeah, I mean, they're still there. It's just right now, just because of COVID, that the volunteers aren't able to go in as much. But
you volunteered to do that. It's really good of you.
well, oh, thanks. I mean, let's not. We don't have to pat me on the back.
I'm
I
patting you
feel
on the
like,
back. Take it.
but honestly, like I volunteer, like I feel good doing it. So it's not like people look at it as like this selfless thing. It's not really, because I feel good
You
doing
should
it.
feel good to do good things. That makes you good. But to recognize that that's a thing you do that can make you feel good is part of what being a good person is.
Well, anyways, in any case, okay, thank you.
I just want to point out you're not a good person. We'll do an episode on self-interest versus selfishness
Okay.
at some point. But just recognizing that you get a good feeling out of doing something doesn't make what you're
Yeah,
doing any less good. In fact, it's good. The fact that you recognize it is the best part. That's how you continue to do good things. To
right.
realize doing good makes you feel good. It should make you feel good.
Look, fine, 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 fine. Whatever.
Yeah. Sorry, I
Yeah,
had to
no,
say that.
no, no. I'm just saying, like, because sometimes I feel like I bring it up, it's like I volunteer, but it's like I do it because like it makes me feel good to help. Like I feel like I'm doing something, and
As an empathetic person yourself, did you ever hear the stories and did it ever affect? Did you ever take that home with you?
yeah. So that's a good question. We were actually trained, so we had like this 40-hour training thing, and it was actually really great. Like you learn a lot of really interesting stuff that I think everybody should probably just learn in life. But one of the things we learned about was vicarious trauma, which is
Mm.
which I'm not going to I'm the worst at defining things, but
I hope I'm not causing you any vicarious trauma in this.
no, but it is if you're listening to people's stories, and if you're doing it a lot every day, there's a point where you can also get kind of there's a word for it, some kind of fatigue. So like not empathy fatigue, it's like compassion fatigue.
Compassion fatigue.
Mhm.
So you had to learn how to support people who are traumatized.
Yeah,
It's easy when you hear so much of something, it's harder to feel as compassionate over time. Just
yeah,
you get a little desensitized
yeah, yeah,
to hearing or dealing with something, which is understandable for a person. But I think it's important that just because you might feel compassion fatigue, which is understandable, not to slight somebody else. Because I've heard in the past, people who've been through or have that compassion fatigue themselves kind of might spread it a little bit. Like they might
mm,
be like, just get over it or whatever, like
right,
not realizing that that might be more unique to
yeah.
them.
Well, this kind of ties into both that, because like, so one of the calls I got, it was kind of upsetting, because it was upsetting. It was from a woman who was she was very like she was calling, and she was just like, I need the names of three, I just need some names of different shelters in the city, and the city. So she was naming three cities across like a few different provinces, because
Okay.
she was from London. So she was like, I've spoken with you guys before, like she was on the run basically, and she was looking for different places, and she needed options, and she told me some of her story. And I mean, part of her story was she was concerned about her 12-year-old daughter who was left there, like in London, and she was
Mm,
telling me all the horrible things that might happen to this girl because of the gangs and all. Like there was just a lot of messed up stuff. And
okay.
so I was like, oh, I have a duty to report, because anytime you hear about something like that in a minor, you have to call CAS and let them know, so that, or SCAS, the Children's Aid Society, or am I saying that?
Gotcha.
I
Yeah.
should
Okay.
know all
What's
this stuff.
CAS? Yeah.
CAS, yeah. I don't know if okay. And then so I'm like, okay. And this was I usually worked like Sunday afternoons, because I liked that one. There was usually no one else there, so I liked working alone. So I call CAS, and the woman there was just like, hello. And I was like, hi. I have like a duty to report. I work I'm a volunteer here at blah blah blah. So I told her the whole thing, and she was like, we're closed. So I'm gonna have to, can I get your name? We'll call you back on Monday. I was like, what? No, like that's not, I was
This is
like,
an
no,
emergency.
I was
Like,
like, yeah, I have to, I'm supposed to let, like, this person could be in danger. Like I can't give you like, I'm here once a week. Like, what do you, and she was like, and she was like really pissed that she had to, I don't know, like write a note about it. I was like, can you just put down this
oh,
person's number and call whoever's here? Like, just call this, like, so I gave her the number. But like, she was very, and I just figured like, okay,
compassion fatigue.
yeah, exactly. She
Yeah.
must hear horror, because I was like, I was relaying these details, and I was like, how can you respond to this with like administrative stuff? Like, where is your human? Where's the human in you? Like, how are you responding to what I'm telling you with we're closed? It doesn't make sense to me that someone could respond that way. But I guess if all you hear is messed up stuff happening to children, you must have compassion fatigue, or I don't know what you would. Yeah. So yeah, I don't envy that job.
I mean, I told you my dad, his job was, and again, since his health issues, it caused him kind of to be in a forced retirement, but he dealt with like the worst of the worst people and criminals in society who've done horrible things.
Yeah.
He was a forensic psychologist.
Yeah.
And he would see people who like he would just interact with people who chopped other people up and murdered them, and serial killers.
Yeah.
And I think he was desensitized to that stuff for sure, because he'd hear about horrible stuff happening. I can sense that he might have had a little of that compassion fatigue too, because he just saw the worst of the worst in society all the time. That it's almost like a defense mechanism, I think, that your body sometimes, or your brain does that.
It can't handle all that all the time. Like, it's just not.
So under fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, what does that fall? I think there's a new one. I think we need a 5th F.
Yeah. I feel like I need to abandon the 4 Fs in the course of this conversation.
The 4th one is compassion fatigue.
Fatigue. Oh,
fatigue.
God.
So they call it fatigue.
One? Fatigue. Yeah.
Fatigue is the 5th F.
Oh, man.
Do you feel like you've experienced more vicarious trauma in your life?
I think it's only vicarious trauma when there's a life disruption in your own. So there is secondary trauma, which is just when you
hear about it or something and it affects you emotionally.
Yeah, distress experienced by a person hearing.
But vicarious trauma literally disrupts your life in some way. Like you can't think or sleep or work because you've been affected by someone else's trauma.
Right. So thankfully, no, I don't think I have at some points considered like going into some kind of counseling sort of thing, or maybe I would want to work at ANOVA. That's the women's shelter, sexual assault center. So I considered that, and then I was like, I don't think I could. I think I would really. I don't think I could handle it. I'm overly. I mean, you saw me. Like
you cry.
My emotions are like right at the edge, and yeah, it's not.
I didn't make you cry this episode, so maybe you're.
Yeah, that's true.
You're good now. You're desensitized.
Yeah, I'm already desensitized in the course of these 2 episodes.
Your compassion fatigue is kicked in after I've told you too many stories.
Yeah, I don't care. I don't care about your sad stories anymore, Josh.
Is a question. With my dad, for example, it's a mixture, right? That's vicarious trauma that I've experienced because I've had trouble. It's affected me really deeply.
Yeah.
But it's also, I feel like it's both trauma and vicarious trauma. I'm dealing with his trauma,
right?
And I'm dealing with the trauma of potentially losing my father and seeing him suffer. So it's a mixture of both of those, right? The line gets blurred.
I think so, because you're dealing with the trauma of being you and having your father deal with that, and you're talking to him all the time and dealing with what it's like to be him.
Yeah.
Right. In a way, like.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like
trying
I'm
to understand that. Yeah.
And then I'm also just like, I have my own fears and worries and concerns about it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. It's been really interesting. And so I'll just ask you then, what are some of the ways that like you had to help people? Like you've asked me what I've done to try to manage my trauma, like basically for me, it's been have great friends who are there for me and some great adulthood friends. And also I've never been one I don't lock things up inside me. I'm not like, I don't repress things. I think my dad, he represses stuff. I really think he does. And I think my uncle, when I told you that story, when he kind of like blew up at me about not wearing a jacket, I think he had that element of repression in there too. We talked about Holocaust survivors last episode, and some of them are more open to talking than others. Other people repress it, right? And I guess there's advantages and disadvantages, but there's a real disadvantage to repression, right?
Yeah.
It comes out in some way or another if you don't deal with it. And I've done my best personally to deal with it. I talk about it.
Yeah.
And not just, I'm talking to you about it now, but I've talked about it before, I've talked to my friends. Again, I haven't talked to a professional therapist per se, but I've talked to rabbis and teachers. And the hardest people that I find to talk about this stuff with, I can talk to all kinds of people. Do you know who I find it hardest to talk to? Like about, let's say, my mother's death. I find it hard to talk to my brothers about it.
Oh, I was going to guess that. And then I'm like, I would think that they would be the ones who understand.
It triggers things the most actually to talk to them
Oh,
because we
okay.
were all a part of it. And also I feel the most a certain empathy. Again, I get that like
Yeah.
it's it's extra traumatic because I feel my
Right.
brother's trauma as well.
Gotcha.
And
Yeah.
so I don't often, and again, when I talked to my brother and he said I'm happy she's dead, that was really hard to hear, even though I understood it.
Yeah.
And talking to my dad about stuff, I mean,
Yeah.
again, my dad, she didn't treat my dad great. So I've heard my dad both blames himself for what happened
Yeah.
and felt horrible about it and dealt with the trauma. And then he also dealt with the trauma of how she treated him before that. It's a big mess of emotions, and talking to my family about it, my immediate family
Right.
is really tough.
Yeah.
I do, but it's tough. So I do think though, in general, not repressing the stuff and figuring out how I feel. And one of the biggest things for me is combating the cognitive dissonance
Mm.
that I feel about stuff. Just recognizing that life is gray. Like
Yeah.
there's no right or wrong. My brother can be right in his feelings when he said, "I'm happy she's dead," and
Mm.
we could also be right in saying, I miss her. I miss my mother,"
Yeah.
and that she was a mother to us,
Right.
and all of that can be true at the same time.
Mhm.
I think that's one of the biggest, for me at least, in dealing with this trauma, is recognizing that
Mm.
things aren't black and white, and just accepting what happened so you can grieve and move forward, and
Yeah.
let that, let it be a part of you
Yeah.
without denying it.
Yeah.
I think that's the healthiest thing you could do. It doesn't mean it goes away. It doesn't go away,
Right.
but not denying it, I think, really helps for me at least. I think Michael Lander, when we had him on, talked about that
Yeah.
a bit.
Yeah. And a lot of what you're talking, like dealing with grief in some ways can be different than also, dealing with an ongoing trauma or an ongoing cognitive dissonance. So like
Mm.
what you're saying, I mean, just to tie it back to what I was the one thing I know a little more about was the
That's what I was going to ask you, by the way. I
yeah,
wanted to know, I
yeah.
told you me, but what's from what you've learned, like, I want to know what your thoughts are on how to manage trauma.
Well, I don't think I know how to manage trauma. I know how to validate. Like the main thing when you're talking to someone and doing supportive listening is to validate them and support them and empower them. So like, I mean, a lot of the time people will ask you, and it's kind of strange. So like I've had people on the phone like, but what should I do? What should I do? And I'm like, I can't tell you what you should do. Like you're the expert in your life. You know what would work for you. Like so you kind of try to give them
Mhm.
the feeling that they're capable of dealing with something.
Right.
Again, this is kind of it's different because it's an ongoing situation and they'll often be like have very mixed feelings. They'll say like, oh, but I'm not going to do any better than like this guy supports me or he does all of this for me or
Right.
he's the father to my children or this is going to happen. And then, but also he treats me terribly most of the time or some of the time.
Mm.
It's so complex and you
It's
can't,
great. Again, that's the whole
it's
thing.
so great. Yeah.
It's not black and white, and dealing with that. Just
Yeah.
first of all, I've talked about dealing with it mentally. A lot of those people you dealt with are dealing with it physically.
Right. Yeah.
Do I leave?
Yeah.
Do I stay? What choice do I make in the moment? That's more immediate. And to me, that takes precedence over just mental grief.
Right. And I mean, either they don't have anywhere to go, or even if they leave, like, I mean, it solves one problem, it creates more. And I mean, their children, or
Hmm.
they recently made a shelter that has pets as well, because
Okay,
a
because
lot of people would stay because they were worried about what would happen to their pet if they left.
they're really great at helping deal with trauma. I think
Yeah,
emotional support animals. And,
no, they are. And I actually remember like I hadn't had like a proper pet at the time, and I was like, oh my God, you're in like an abusive situation. It's so easy when you don't know exactly what a situation is like to say what someone else should do.
yeah,
So I think like if you are listening to someone saying something, never tell them what you think they should do,
right.
because you don't know what it's like to be them.
So really, so you don't, but because
Yeah.
to me it would be simple to say, like, if someone is being abusive to you, leave. Like, like, don't
Right.
stick
So,
around. It's not that simple.
well, um, no, there are a lot. I've sometimes, like I said, when I go through the notes, it's like repeat callers, and
Mm,
it's a situation that we're keeping an eye on, and we'll say, so one of the first questions that we ask when someone calls is, are you safe right now?
right,
And sometimes there isn't room at the shelter, so
right.
they're like, I need to get out, and we're like, so we don't have room here, but just come here and we'll figure something out. Or like, it's not.
We should say, someone, if you're dealing with a physical abuse,
Yeah.
like, we got to figure a way out of that, right? That's not something that's gonna just.
Right. It's not like we're
That's
saying,
not
oh,
like,
are you not
it happened on
enjoying
Tuesday.
being horribly treated? Are you not enjoying that? Oh, okay. Well, then I guess maybe. No, of course, we
Mm,
validate, like, yes, that's a problem, but it's also, you can't make people do something
yeah,
And a lot of people go back. It was a really high percentage. I forget exactly, but it was something like, so we went into a bit of the psychology of why people go back. What are some of the reasons that someone might return to an abusive
Right.
situation? And I mean, it happens all the time.
Yeah. I've seen it happen with people I know. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it is really our job not to judge anyone, because you
Of
really,
course.
yeah. And it seems so easy to say, but it's like, okay, I mean, this isn't a good example, but even when you're talking about your mother being abusive, I mean, she's still your mother. What if,
It's a great example.
I mean, it's excessive, because I mean, it's but
It's true.
I
Yeah.
mean, people, if this is all they have, it's their world, it's their whole world. What if it's the father of their kid? What if they leave, they're going to be causing problems for someone else, and they're like, if I stay, then nobody, there's so many
Of
things.
course, that's
Yeah.
complex. I mean, it's a good example in that you're right. That is that non-black and white aspect there
Yeah.
where she might have been abusive at times, but she was still my mother. And
Yeah.
in losing her, I've lost the abusive stuff, but I also lost all the good stuff. It's
Right.
like when when you break up with someone, yeah, you break up to lose the bad stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, you often are suffering afterwards because you've also lost all the good stuff.
For sure. Of course. Yeah.
And denying that the good stuff was there doesn't help
Yeah.
either.
In those kinds of situations, it's often, I don't want to say Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, but like, it is often that there's that extreme, and then there's the I'm sorry part where, they're ultra nice and ultra, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, to use one of your
Yeah.
favorite terms, in those people.
What does cognitive dissonance mean again? Let's just define this for anyone who doesn't know.
Well, it's when you have two competing ideas
Or
in your,
beliefs, yeah.
oh, not two or more. Okay, you define
No,
it.
you're
You
right. It's
define it.
like
I hate defining things. I hate defining things. It's one of my like fears. Yeah.
it's having two or more competing beliefs, right?
Mm,
And they cause a mental discomfort.
yeah.
It's like believing what is the classic example, right? Like you believe you should stop eating to lose weight, but you
Mhm.
also want to keep eating. Like those
Oh yeah.
two,
Yeah.
you get
Yeah.
a cognitive dissonance about it, and you're like you keep
Yeah.
doing one thing and believing one thing, but yet you also believe the other thing. And those
Right.
people often get that cognitive dissonance about, like, say, politicians and stuff. Like
Mm,
they support some politician. This is the one I support.
yeah.
I believe them. I voted for them, and yet they're doing something I don't like at the same time.
Yeah.
And then people solve that cognitive dissonance by trying to justify the thing that they don't like,
Right.
or they,
Yeah.
one way or another, instead of just accept.
It's hard to maintain too.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
like I was saying before, I think the key is you have to acknowledge the gray of it all. Like you
Mm,
have to say, yeah, I support this person. I don't support this thing they're doing, and
yeah.
I've weighed the pros and cons, and I've chosen this, but
Yeah.
I don't agree with that. That's harder for people to do, I think.
Yeah. That's definitely difficult. Yeah. So the cognitive dissonance just makes it so that it's not an easy decision or an easy thing to do. Sometimes it's just like, where are they supposed to go? Are they supposed to leave their kids? Are they supposed to leave their everything? Like,
Right.
yeah.
Wow, that's a lot to take on. I can see how that could lead
Yeah.
to vicarious trauma.
I mean, I didn't do it for that long. I think there were a few times where I actually, right now I can't recall as much, like, but I remember right after a shift, I'd feel really like unresolved, because you don't find out a lot of the time what happened, right? It's like you
Yeah.
hear this snippet of a story about someone who's going through this crazy thing, and then that's it. Like,
Right.
it's not like they're calling back like, oh yeah, just wanted to let you know everything's fine. Like, nobody, I mean, sometimes they will. Sometimes you'll have the repeat callers, or we had like the
Yeah.
regulars that would call a lot, but like,
Does that linger in your brain though, not knowing sometimes? Like, I wonder what happened with that person, with
yeah,
that family.
sometimes. But I would also try not, they tell you not to, I mean, this was interesting because Michael said the opposite when we had him on, but like, they were like, try not to take it home with you too much, or like sometimes I would
Right.
just talk to someone about it and then feel like,
Yeah.
okay.
There's different trains of thought on that, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. But
I know I'm not someone to be able to talk about things like sexual assault and stuff like
mm,
that. And I don't have the knowledge or the expertise to really
yeah.
discuss that myself.
Yeah.
But I do, it's reminded me, like I had an ex-girlfriend who had some pretty tough stories there,
Yeah.
and tough experiences
Yeah.
that, again, I remember hearing one of these stories, and I cried. I cried
Mm,
listening to the story that she told me. And I just, God, I remember just thinking, this thing that she had to deal with. Like, how does it not, like, mess you? He meant some of this stuff like mess
yeah.
you up, and
It does mess you up. That's the answer, is it does mess you
it
up.
does mess you up. And I want to say, talk about resilience. It's great. We go, oh my God, someone's so strong, but I don't think we should. not belittle, but we shouldn't, if something messes you up, that's totally natural too.
Yeah.
If you've been through a messed up experience, and
Yeah.
you're not weak. You're not weak if you have to deal with that, or if it affects you. I remember that ex-girlfriend. I remember once we were just like, we were talking. I guess it got a little heated. Like, it wasn't an argument. We were just kind of, what do you call it? Like, it was just a little raised.
Yeah. A squabble.
It wasn't even really a squabble. I don't know. But as I was talking with her, I was just kind of like in my hand. I had like a coat hanger in my hand, and I was kind of like waving it around. And she like cowered suddenly in fear and backed up. And I was like, what's going on? What's wrong? And she like was in fear, like suddenly like froze and backed away. And I didn't understand. And she was like looking in my hand at the coat hanger. I'm like, what? Like, oh, this?
Yeah.
What? I raised it up again. She like cowered again. I was like, oh my God, you think?
Yeah.
I'm like, I dropped it. I was like, what do you think I was gonna do with that? You think she's like, I don't know. I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? You think I would?
But there's no rational thought, right?
I was just kind of like toying with it. But the thing was that this isn't me. It's something from, she was triggered.
Exactly.
Something in her past, it triggered her. And that's, that's a trauma response right there, right? Like, and seeing that actually happen, like that's, people get PTSD. They get, PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, right?
That's right.
It's literally it's a disorder that people have, right? Because it disrupts your life. You're not weak. I just want to say, if that happens to you, that's a totally normal thing.
Yeah.
And you're not resilient.
Right.
If you have to fight those demons,
Well, yeah. Well, that example is a perfect example of a perceived threat where there wasn't one.
Exactly. So I just, I was thinking, you mentioned last time we talked about leaders versus followers in the last episode. And I was just thinking about it. And I guess my personality mindset, because I feel more, have more of a leadership mindset, probably contributed a little to how I manage trauma. I wanted to take control of it.
Right.
I wanted to enact change and affect, I tried to create better circumstances for myself, all this stuff, like, right. I kind of like took the reins, but I can understand some people have a different mindset where they're deferring to an authority. They just want an answer. What do I do?
Yeah.
Where do I go? What do I do? Right.
Yeah.
And both of those are valid,
of course,
kind of coping mechanisms.
Yeah. And if you need help, there are so many resources for people. I mean, in a way, not enough, but also there are lots. So I hope people reach out.
So you're saying it's always
good to reach out.
To reach. Yeah. So it is good to, and that's the whole thing. You were saying one of the things that helped me was reaching out and talking to people. If not a therapist, but it starts somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But there's no shame in going to, there is obviously no shame in going to speak to somebody. All my friends seem to be talking to friends and therapists and telling me how great it is. I feel a little left out now.
I love it. I get book recommendations. I did want to say something with that too. Oh, because you were talking about like how people have trauma imposter syndrome stuff, or like how people feel like, oh, this isn't enough to go to a therapist even. And now I'm remembering, like, I would get calls where they were like, I don't know if this is even like a good like 5 minutes of the beginning of the call would be like, I don't even know, like, this is a crisis. I don't know if this is a crisis. I don't know if I should be calling.
Oh my God, that's literally how I responded on the phone when I called the ambulance. Like, I didn't even know.
Exactly. And I'd be like, no, it's fine. Yeah, please tell me. Yeah.
Literally, my mom was dying in front of me and I didn't know whether I should be calling the ambulance.
Yeah.
So in that situation, I didn't know. You can only imagine.
Yeah.
It's so easy for people
to never know. And often the stuff that someone would tell me after not knowing was like, I was like, of course this is
of course.
Yeah, like what, whereas sometimes someone else calls and they'll be like, oh, this is a problem, and then you're like, oh, okay, like they just actually wanted some supportive listening. That's fine. Anything is fine, but it's just like people's self-evaluation sometimes can be really, or like the way you see something in the moment, you don't know, or you're less likely maybe to ask for help naturally. So yeah. So
well, I just want to say, if you ever need to talk.
Well, I guess I need to talk weekly with you.
Even not on the podcast. If you ever just want to talk.
Thanks, Josh. Same to you.
We're friends. And do you feel like we bonded more after this episode?
Bonded a little too much. I think I'm going to need a week off now, but no.
Oh boy.
No, I appreciate that you opened up, and I really, I always knew that you went through these things, but it's pretty different to really hear the details of how someone went through that stuff.
Because you'd heard about it in the community. Like, this is, you just kind of heard about it at the time. Like my mom, for example.
I heard about it.
My dad's cancer.
I mean, I'm pretty bad with I'm a very compartmentalizing person for like intense stuff. Yeah. So if I can avoid thinking, I kind of do. I think I I think I said something to you at school, but I honestly, I don't even remember. But yeah, when that stuff happened.
I was still working at the library with you at the time. I'm sure you drove me to the
Oh,
library and
probably, yeah.
came up at some point.
Yeah, for some reason I don't remember, but again, I think that's probably some compartmentalizing stuff.
It was just so cruel and rude what you said that I just forced it out of my brain.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah,
No, I don't know.
no, I'm
I don't
sure
know. I don't know.
you've always been wonderful, Aya.
No, like, yeah, I think we're closer now. I always feel awkward at the end of this when you say very nice things and I don't know how to respond to them.
But I think we're very similar, by the way. We both compartmentalize. And by the way, that's one of the ways that I managed, for me at least, a lot of my trauma is that I put things in box. It doesn't mean I put it away,
No.
but I put it in a box and then I could access that box when I wanted to. And I tried not to let those things bleed into each other. There'd be people who'd be like, are you sure you can work on this thing? Like, we're talking about moms or something. Or I'm like, no, I'm fine. Like, I can.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we were talking about in that one episode, like it's separation between fantasy and reality. It's not like one of these is fantasy, but it's just the idea that you can separate things and not let one thing in your mind turn into something that it's not. I try to be, just because I went through a trauma doesn't mean that I have to.
It doesn't have to rule your.
Yeah, it doesn't have to rule me in my perceptions. Right? It's one thing. I can get triggered by a song. I get triggered by a memory, but in general, I don't think, and people can tell me otherwise, maybe they see it differently. I don't think it's suddenly I'm ruder or
No.
At least I try not to be. But it's true, sometimes when we are triggered by something, we don't realize how we're coming off. And it's something to work on and check our perceptions, check ourselves a little bit.
Check yourself. Well, maybe we'll try to trigger you next time and see how you respond. And then we'll have a recording.
So now I know you're going to want to see it as a challenge. You want to see, like, can I trigger Josh? I want to trigger him to respond horribly.
I think I would be, okay, this is a side note, but there was a point during our last phone conversation where I actually thought you might be upset at me. And I had like this reaction that was like, oh my God, I made Josh mad at me. And I was like, I don't know what to do. How do I deal with this? Like, I couldn't handle it because you're so nice. I was like,
I'm never mad at you.
Exactly. Yeah. So you actually haven't.
At most I get a little irritated. Not even with you.
I think you were irritated.
At most I get a little.
You might have
No,
been
but I
irritated.
probably wasn't even irritated with you.
Okay.
I can disagree with someone without being like upset at them.
It was the way that you said, that's not a helpful question, and I was just like, oh my God, I think
oh no,
Josh
probably just a little too short in the way I said it.
No, it's fine. So this isn't for you to apologize. This is for me to have some self-awareness. Do you know how often I get like kind of irritated and it's nothing to you? Like, it's fine.
I irritate you all the time.
No, it's not that you irritate me. It's that I'm quick to anger. I don't know, like I have a temper or something, but like,
I think we talked about this before. You're fine, Aya.
Okay, well, you had the tiniest hint of maybe Josh is mad at me, and I was like, oh my God, what have I done? The nicest person that like just got irritated with me. It's just funny. So
well, I wasn't, for the record.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, because when I brought it up, you were like, what? No. I was like, oh, unless you were just gaslighting me.
What was it? Episode
14
flashback.
Yeah, episode 14
episode
flashback.
14.
Well,
all right, Aya, we're done. We're wrapping this up.
Have we been traumatized enough? Are we
Yeah, we've been traumatized. Have we traumatized all the listeners enough?
I hope so. I hope that's
I hope so. Yeah, I hope you were traumatized by my story.
Yeah, I hope you were traumatized.
Because if not, you have no heart. No, it's horrible.
That's really bad.
Or I'm a really bad storyteller.
No, you're great. You're a good storyteller. I mean, I definitely felt a little traumatized. So if that makes you feel better.
Great. I'm glad.
Good. All right.
I made you cry once. We're good.
You did.
That's all I wanted. I wanted to make you cry.
I mean, it's not a huge feat. Like, I cry very easily, as we've pointed out, but that's okay.
But it's the first time I made you cry on this podcast, right?
I've gotten teary-eyed before. I've just hidden it well. But
oh, really? No, come on, give it to me. That was episode 15. I made you cry.
That was the first.
15.
That was a real
okay,
that was a disruptive cry. I have teared up, gotten a little bit
misty-eyed,
watery-eyed before. Misty-eyed, that was the word, but you haven't been able to see it. One of the wonders of Zoom is how easy it is for me to hide my emotions. So.
Oh.
Yeah,
well, great. So we traumatized. I didn't traumatize. Well, I don't know.
Potentially, yeah. I know we're making a joke now because we're both. This is how we deal with this stuff. But
this is how we deal with it. We brought a dark sense of humor about all this. There you go.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Let's
do a serious.
Take us out of here, Aya.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. And all jokes aside, if you do need help, please don't hesitate to reach out to someone. There's someone who cares about you. even if you think it's something small, you should reach out.
Yeah. I mean, you can joke about it like us all you want,
Yeah,
but definitely,
we know it still affects
you
you.
should do something about it. And there's no shame in that.
Yeah.
Not only that, there's a strength in that.
Yeah.
There's a real strength in that. Again, you were saying I'm resilient. Maybe I sometimes I feel like I didn't have the strength to go and ask for help, maybe, or talk to someone that I should have, and I would justify the way things are. But I think it's worth noting that there's not a strength in not doing it.
Yeah.
So I think there's really more of a strength in reaching out when you need it.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
Did you feel like it was like kind of therapeutic to go to even share this
podcast?
Yeah, like
sharing with you. Talking to you in general is very therapeutic. Like, even if
oh,
this wasn't on a podcast and I was just talking to you, you respond, the
that's
way you
nice.
respond to things is really, really wonderful. Like, I really love talking to you.
Oh, that's so nice.
Thanks,
Josh.
it's been great. Yeah.
Thanks. Well, I feel the same. You're a good listener too.
What do you mean? You didn't tell me, you didn't share hardly any stories. So apparently you don't think the
But if
same.
I were to, I would know that you would listen well. Yeah. Well, this has been another episode of Adulthood Friends, episode 16. And thank you for listening. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please feel free to follow us on Facebook and subscribe, follow, whatever, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you like to listen. I think that's about it. Is that it, Josh?
Well, how do we usually end this thing, Aya?
I don't know. I guess one of us is saying something, bloopity blop blop, boppity boop, and then the music just kind of.
What is it? What does the music do?
No, you're not gonna get me again.
Get you again? What are you talking about?
You're not gonna
kind of
get me
stopped
again.
You stopped mid sentence, and I don't know what you were about to say. What does the music do?
You're gonna put the music back there. The music there.
What are you talking about?
Well, that's the thing we do, isn't it?
I'm gonna do the mute. What are you saying? You were in the middle of a sentence. I want to let you finish what you were saying. I interrupt you enough in this podcast. I don't want to interrupt you with the music.
Yeah, that's the bit. That's the bit we do. Is that the music interrupts one of us?
What are you talking about, Aya? This is a very serious episode.
No,
you think we're just gonna?
Yeah.
We're talking about trauma this episode. You think I'm just gonna have the music interrupt?
This is the podcast that
never ends. That's a traumatic song, by the way.
Yeah,
that song is traumatizing.
I actually am sorry that I even brought it up because now it'll be in my head. I can't.